free speech and sacred spaces. And this was prompted a little bit by, if you all remember, back in January, which was not 6 years ago, but was just 2 months ago. There was a big protest at a church um, where a ICE official is a pastor and two journalists, Don Lemon and Georgia Fort, were there live streaming, and that footage went viral online and caused a lot of controversy. And before long, uh, the Department of Justice had arrested the two journalists and about 30 protesters, charging them with violating the FACE Act, which is the a Clinton era law which protects access to reproductive health clinics and churches, which is a fascinating thing in and of itself. But the incident raised a whole bunch of issues about the First Amendment, about freedom of the press, about freedom of religion, um, and we wanted to. And what happens when freedom of the press and freedom of religion collide? So we want to talk about this. So here to help us talk about this are two pros. Well, first, I'm Bob Smietana. I guess I'm the national reporter for RNS, and I'm the moderator today and the host. The two pros who are going to help us are Manya Brachear Pashman. She was a longtime award-winning religion reporter for the Chicago Tribune, covered papal transitions, talked about the emerging role of religion in politics, investigated clergy misconduct. She's hosted a number of podcasts now, is trying to revive a podcast for PBS in New Jersey, and is, if it was from 2016 to 2019, was the president of the Religion News Association, of which I was also president for 2 years. So we were on the board together for many, many years. So, and then Ken Paulson is director of the Free Speech Center at Middle Tennessee State University, the dean emeritus and professor at the university, and a former editor-in-chief of USA Today. So we're going to start with a couple of questions about this event, and then we're going to eventually go into Q&A for the last 15 minutes. But I am actually going to start with a story. So back in maybe 15 or so years ago, maybe it's probably actually 2009. So that's how many years ago? 17 years ago. I was covering a schism at a church. This church had been feuding on the front page of the newspaper for months, and it was a big, well-known church. So I go to a church meeting about the schism, and it was supposed to be open to the public. And right at the beginning of the meeting, they go, "If you're not a member, it's time for you to leave." So I'm like, I'm supposed to be here. So I get up my bag and I walk out. But this is a mega church has screens everywhere. So they are broadcasting the meeting throughout the building. So I hang around, which worked great until the police showed up. And they said, "Hi, you're a reporter from Tennessee and you need to leave now." And they escorted me from the building. Uh, and I did go back to that church many times. But that one thing that happened with that incident is I covered that church a whole bunch of times. There were lots of other events and protests there, including one from the Westboro Baptist outside the church, and a protest by people in the church. The one thing that really struck me, though, is some years later I was covering church, and the people were really angry at me. And they were angry for two reasons. One, they felt disrespected by me staying, that they'd asked me to leave their property and I didn't. But also, they were angry that they had to call the police on me. They're like, "This is not what we want to be doing. We don't want to be calling the police on reporters." And so, what you did, um, put us in a really awkward situation. That made me think, oh, did I do the right thing? Which I think I probably didn't. Actually, I know I did not think I did. I would not do it the way I did now. I would not have stayed around. But it probably influences how I see this incident. So anyway, I wanted to start off with that story so that we know where I'm coming from. So let's start with Ken. So if a protest happens in a house of worship during a worship service, how does the First Amendment come into play?
Well, the dynamic is that 60% of the First Amendment is in play. I'm grateful for that story, Bob, because if you'd done it at a later point during a different administration, you could be serving 10 to 20 right now. So I'm glad you're a free man. One of the things that's fascinating about this set of circumstances that involves, obviously, freedom of faith. It involves freedom of press. It also involves freedom of assembly. And those three together are not actually on a collision course here, but there are competing interests,
Mhm.
absolutely. And 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 while there is space for all three in a house of worship, the truth is that um, when you are a reporter in a house of worship, you kind of have to decide what kind of hat you're wearing. Are you there as a worshiper? Are you there as a recorder of the event, or as has been alleged, as against Don Lemon, are you a participant in the protest or an encourager of the protest? So it's for somebody in my line of work which is really trying to educate and inform the public
Mhm.
about how the First Amendment works. This is one of those wonderful set of circumstances where you can say, they're all important, they're all critical to the American experience and the way we live as a nation, but they have to accommodate each other in one form or another. And I think under normal circumstances, without a Justice Department that is hell bent on prosecuting dissent, um, the circumstances could be dramatically different. You could have a reporter in a house of worship, and no one would be thinking twice about it.
Mhm. And does I wonder if you talk a little bit about how it plays here, if it's uh, if a church is considered private property or public space, and how that plays out.
Sure. A church is absolutely private property, no different from a movie theater or any other uh, any business. They are going to be able to control who is in their building and who is not. And the most basic thing. You mentioned my background at USA Today. How many conversations I've had with reporters over the years who would say, "Well, the police officer's telling me to go, but I have a right to be there." And I always just say, "Do what the police officer says, and we'll call in the lawyers. But your goal, short term, is not to be taken off the story because you've been arrested." So, what's really interesting about this case is the protesters are on really thin ice in terms of their role in this incident. And then the reporters, in my view, have tremendous protection and
Mhm.
should never have been prosecuted. But one of the most common elements of the law is actually you can't come onto my private property. The only place where this gets a little complicated for the protesters is a church. You're actually inviting the public to
Mhm.
come in. So it's pretty clear they did not trespass when they came in. The trespass occurs when you refuse to leave, as you refuse to leave. So the principles are really simple, and the consequences are almost always the same. You get hauled off if you refuse to leave, but a journalist shouldn't have to leave.
So I was going to ask to both Ken and Manya. So if a reporter is in a house of worship and covering a protest and has to leave, what are their legal standing, and then what is their, what are the kind of right things to do or the practical things they have to think about?
Ken, if I could jump in here, I would argue that, you know, the right thing to do is to be persistent, right? I mean, we as reporters know that we can talk our way into anything if we try hard enough in most cases, and it's our job to try. So I think the rule is to be persistent, to try to reason with the person and convince them that you are a surrogate of the public and that you would like to stay and tell their story, but don't be confrontational. That's when you cross a line. Persistent but not confrontational, because that's when you become disruptive, and that's when you've crossed a line. Ken, do you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, this is where professionalism comes in. Don't get in people's face. You explain clearly what you're trying to do there, that you have a right to be there. In the end, though, if they tell you to leave, it's in your interest to leave at that moment. It's not crystal clear what Don Lemon did or did not do. My sense was that the pastor eventually came to him and said, "Now get out now," and that he did. But what actually happened in those minutes, I'm not sure we know at all. I suppose if you say to the pastor, "No, I'm not leaving. You're going to have to make me leave," you could probably prosecute it. And on the other hand, if you simply state your purpose for being there and they say no, it's time to leave.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I think that the previous statement, that's confrontational, right? I mean, that's when you're challenging. And you're right, of course it's private property in the end, but it is open to the public. We are surrogates of the public, right? We're there to share their story with the public. And ultimately, it's private property, but that doesn't mean we can't try to stay
Right.
and plead our case.
And does identifying your press as the press play a role in this, in terms of whether you should stay or not, or how you interact with other folks?
I mean, I think that it depends on the circumstance, right? I am not opposed, and certainly, when we open this up to the audience, you guys can disagree and tell me I'm just wrong. But I'm not opposed to putting your reporter's pad in your pocket and sitting down and taking it all in, and not clearly identifying yourself, not advertising that you are a reporter if you feel like you're in a hostile situation or a situation where they might toss you out as soon as they find out. Of course, if someone approaches you and says, "Are you a reporter?" or, "What brings you here?" you have to be honest about that. But, I am not opposed to sitting there and taking it all in and, slipping into the ladies' room and jotting down notes and going back. Been there, done that. So.
And I wonder if we could talk just for a bit about the kind of, because a lot of this, the devil's in the details, I suppose you say, but I wonder if the two reporters doing live streaming, having traveled with if the circumstances of this also affect how we see this event.
So it feels to you more like reality TV than actual journalism?
Yeah, it seems like, so I was thinking, I'm thinking of all the times I've been there. So if I get a tip that something's going to go down at a church, I'm just going to show up, right? I'm not going to call in. If I was bringing my phone to video, right, then people video in those kind of services all the time. So that's not unusual. It's when you're bringing sort of like live streaming, and if you've got a bigger camera. I think I was just telling folks I was at an event where I was recording with a large microphone and headphones where I would have been obtrusive. That you can't really, that seemed more intrusive. I also thought once, because there's a moment where he's traveling with the group, he turns on the microphone, and then they're about to tell him where they're going. He turns it off. But I thought once you start live streaming an event, there are two parts. One is you're at least in my eyes, the responsibility goes to the public, not to the people you're with. But also the line between live streaming and reporting can be thin. So I wonder what you all think about that, the circumstances.
I think the live stream of something may feel tacky to us because of our collective maturity.
Yes.
And that our, my first laptop was a Smith Corona typewriter. So having said that, I guess I'm okay with any way anybody wants to document this. But I think one thing missing in this discussion, when you talk about capturing that in real time, is that, the question, have reporters with an awareness that an illegal act was going to occur, showing up at a location where they thought news was going to happen? And the answer is absolutely yes, and for the best possible reasons. So think about lunch counters in the 1960s. Reporters were tipped that those young, courageous African-American students were going to be at that lunch counter in Nashville. And what do we get from that? We got photographs, historic photographs. And from those historic photographs came a better understanding of the insidious racial discrimination that was occurring. So, if we had that today and as a stream with good lighting and digital distribution, that's all a force for the good. And that's what kind of surprises me. We have so many precedents of people doing exactly what Don Lemon did to chronicle injustice. And for this to be prosecutable in 2026 is insane.
I mean, I appreciate that comment, Ken, about our collective maturity. I like that comment. I like that characterization. But it's true. I mean, there are so many different modes of delivering information now. And so I think it's completely fair that to walk in and live stream. However, I think that perhaps the way he conducted himself, listen, this was a career moment for Don Lemon, right?
Yeah.
So I think there were other motives at play here, but I think that there are certain ways to conduct yourself, within professional or journalistic professional standards. But also, does live streaming, I think everybody knows you're supposed to check recording laws, right? Depending on what state you are in. Is it a one-party or a two-party recording state? Does the congregation need to know that you're live streaming or recording, the service or whatever is going on? You've got that, but also in our business, there are religious laws. You can't walk into an Orthodox shul on Shabbat with electronics, right? Not necessarily. So, those are all considerations that come into play as well.
And I wonder if you're covering the protest, so this is a question I had, and this is a little bit for Manya, for both Manya and Ken. Who's not allegiance, but you could be covering a protest. How do you cover both sides fairly? If you're covering this protest, are you looking out for the interest of the protesters? There was a little bit of that, or are you looking out for the interest of or thinking about how is my presence here affecting the congregation as well? I don't know if I've asked that quite right, but
yeah, I mean, I think that gets back to the disruptive question, right? That key word of being disruptive. I think that you're as long as you're not the one being the disruptor, right? I mean, you're observing protesters disrupting the service, but you're there to get all 13 sides of the story, right? You have to. If you are leaning one way or the other, you're not necessarily there as a journalist. You have to get it all.
And as you know, from your own experiences, a spot event where people are standing up and yelling, you're not getting any sides.
Yeah.
You're just witnessing what's happening, and then your post event reporting is where you'll make sure that all perspectives are brought in.
Right. Yeah. That's true.
So there's two kind of questions here that I want to ask. One is, how much of a responsibility does a reporter have to be aware of the circumstance? So one thing that struck me is, so the first thing I did, I was, I think we did some little reporting on this, and I called the head of the Southern Baptist Convention, because that church was Southern Baptist Church. So the first thing he says is, I think this was terrible. Also, I'm glad no one got shot because of, and the reason he said that was, well, one is about 10 miles away or 10 minutes away, there was another church shooting recently in that there was someone came into a Catholic, a mass for Catholic school, shot 17 people, killing 2 kids. So there had been a shooting. People got up, started yelling. They started yelling, "Don't shoot, put hands up," that chant, which if you are, I'm like, oh, if you're just sitting there and you're like, "Don't shoot," and say you had an armed security guard who thought people with big devices in their hands, someone could have really gotten hurt in that kind of circumstance. So does a reporter, if you know about this, what are your responsibilities? Should you call that church to say, "I'm coming to your event, to cover this"?
Well, the problem with that is you call the church and say there's a protest coming. You just prevented the protest from happening. You've become a participant.
Yeah.
You have no story, but you've also undermined the people who are your sources, and whether they intend to do something that breaks the law or not is not. You're not the arbiter of that. So I don't know how you could possibly do that. You're just, we're just the eyes and ears of history, and we're not supposed to mess with it.
That said, I think that as reporters, and I can't believe that we're here today. I can't believe that the Religion News Association and then I'm getting ready to offer this advice during a webinar, but you want to take safety precautions, right?
Yeah.
When you're going into these situations. I remember the Tribune newsroom doing training when, political conventions or riots were expected, and, we were getting all the equipment, right? All the gas masks and the bulletproof vests ready. And, we were all going through security training and how to operate in a crowd, how to report, but also get out safely from a crowd situation. And, if something's going to unfold, even in a sanctuary, you want to take the right safety precautions as well. And you can do that for yourself. It may sound selfish not to warn others, but, that's, your responsibility is to get that story and do what it takes to do that.
And would we have viewed this? So can we view this differently if this were a minority religious group? Say there were a group of white supremacists going to go to a synagogue or to a mosque and disrupt the services there. That's one of the law professors I talked to after uncovering this was like, this is not what we really would like in our society. That's why he thought the charges were that it wasn't unreasonable to charge folks, whether he's right or not. The law will see. But I wondered how we would see it differently if a minority group were being disrupted.
Well, it feels to me like, in terms of the disruption, I think there's no question they broke the law, and those who are not reporters, and they disrupted just like if you're in the middle of a movie theater yelling, "There's a fire!" Unless there's a fire, you're causing a disruption in a public place, so you can be charged. So I don't think that's really not a factor here. But I suppose if you believe that there's a greater likelihood of, well, let me put it this way. If you're dealing with white supremacists who say, we're going there and we're going to try to raise hell, and you never know what happens next, that's a tough ethical question, right?
Yeah.
If the distinct possibility of violence gets raised, then you may have to call the church, because you don't want to be responsible for death in the pews. That's a tough one, and we'll send it to a journalism school to hash that over in ethics class.
It is a tough one because we just said you don't insert yourself into a story, right? And there's, I would say, I might say, unless they threaten raise hell, what does that mean? That's what the protesters in Minneapolis were doing too, right?
Right.
That could mean any number of things. If it's a group that has a history of violence, of criminal activity, that should be taken into consideration, perhaps. If it's, but you're asking if it's a particularly vulnerable community.
Yeah.
Right. I think that all of those factor in. All of that factors in. And I don't know if there's a clear answer.
Can I ask both of you a question, given your history as reporters in this area? So if you knew there was a distinct possibility of a protest, would you go in just for the beginning of the service, take it in, be a part of it, and then if it doesn't happen, you've gone to church?
Yeah.
It felt a little more suspect to me if Don Lemon sort of waltzed in with the protesters.
Yeah.
But I don't know why I feel that way. It just almost feels disrespectful.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I was curious as to what your take would be.
I absolutely agree, Ken.
Yeah.
I think that, again, this kind of goes back to his conduct, right? The way he conducted himself, and he was not in the pews listening to what the pastors had to say, chatting up the congregants, doing traditional reporting, and then the protesters walk in and he's there to capture their entrance. That was not how it unfolded. So I think getting that context is very important.
Yeah, it felt very much like he coordinated. That's what I've been part of my concern about, having watched the whole thing several times, that there was a core traveling with the group, than waiting outside till you know when the protest. Like if you're gonna go and there's a protest, I get tipped there's a protest. I'm gonna go sitting there. I'm not gonna. I would be less comfortable traveling with the group. I would certainly be less comfortable withholding information from my broadcast audience, and then I would be there and see what happened. And then people get up, and then I'm starting reporting. Right, this is going
Right.
on, and I've been there. I did see there was a kind of a delay on his part in leaving. Like pastors first trying to interview the pastor when he's trying to calm the situation, send a little bit, not the way I would have conducted that interview. And there wasn't a sense of asking the protesters, why are you doing this? Is this an appropriate thing for you to be doing? There was a lot of yelling. I think just as a person, I'm like, if I was there with my kids to church and some people are yelling. And the funny thing about this church is they have a guy who works for ICE there who wasn't there that day, but they also resettle refugees. So they're not it's like I would have felt different if this was a bless ICE, let's have a blessing of the ICE officers event where it was a much more clear thing. Like, okay, we're doing something that is ethically charged and we ought to be reporting on this. Of the reporting of the disruption of a regular service seemed a little different. So I have a number of I was mad after watching this. Like, no, that's not the way you do this. Like, you can show up, you could be there when they show up, but then, and the presumption, it felt like the P was conveying the message: I'm on the side of righteous. I'm covering the sit-in people doing this, right? As opposed to this is a little more complicated. Like, if it was, I don't want to actually. So the other question I was going to ask: does outside the church versus inside the church matter?
Well, I want to go back just
Yeah,
for a moment because I'm rethinking my answer to Ken's question. I guess there are two different answers. I mean, you could be sitting in the pews and capture it that way and cover it that way. Or to your point earlier, Ken, are you really going to get context in the moment or are you only there to observe?
Yeah.
Do you travel with the protesters who you are going to be able to chat up, right?
Yeah.
And do some reporting as they're making their way to the doors of the church and entering. And then do you observe and then go back and get the context later? Hard to do with the live stream, but
Yeah.
Again, don't know that was the point. So there are two different ways you could approach it, actually.
And just building on that, I think one of the things that makes all of us uncomfortable is that, Don Lemon felt like he was, like if they decided they weren't going in, that he would have said, "No, go in." You feel like he's a cheerleader with an investment in this. But of course, how judgmental can we be about somebody encouraging someone to engage in a legal activity? Because all of us have our hands out for any classified information that might be passed to us by government figures who would be breaking the law and giving it to us. So, yeah, we dance in the nether regions sometimes, don't we?
Yeah. No, it is. It's complicated when you get off the record information. Right? Because you want to confirm it. Like that's your job is to run around and confirm. It's just happening. So it's it is a weird, and the world of streaming makes it all different. And
but Bob, to an earlier point you made, it's interesting that the Justice Department is trying to justify the prosecution in part because both of the reporters involved had very clear points of view in their reporting.
Yes.
And they're suggesting that this isn't real reporting.
Yes.
Because they're on one side. And of course, that's how I feel about Fox. But but I've not seen the government ever try to make that argument because, as you know, the First Amendment protects all sorts of journalism, even if you got some cheerleader in you.
Yeah.
Right.
I do think that. Go ahead, Manya.
No, I was just gonna. No, please continue your point because I was just going to pick up on the question you posed.
The question. The question that's really interesting too about this whole FACE Act thing is, there was a protest at a synagogue, so the FACE Act has been used there as well. What was interesting there is they're charged civilly, not criminally. So this is not just with the protests at a synagogue against some, I think, anti-Gaza war protesters, the government sued them under the FACE Act in civil court versus trying to prosecute them um, during instead of prosecuting them criminally. So it's a really interesting difference.
Was this the synagogue in West Orange, New
Yeah,
Jersey?
West Orange, yeah.
So I'm speaking to you from
right.
Verona, New Jersey, which is right next door to West Orange, and I'm familiar with this case. What happened there? Yes, they are charging the protesters with disrupting the service because, I mean, they could be heard inside the synagogue. And they were clearly, trying to stop people from going in. But what also happened is that there were counter protesters, right? It was two different groups out there, and things got so heated that the counter protesters, it got physical and violent, and those counter protesters were charged with a crime. They were charged with assault.
Okay.
So I do believe that I thought that was interesting that the protesters, the pro-Palestinian, pro-Gaza protesters were charged civilly. Yeah, I thought that was a very interesting distinction.
And the other thing going on, this happened at the same time that a group of denominations have sued the federal government to block ICE from coming in, right? To say that because of our religious freedom, you should not be able to come in and the sensitive area, and right now they just got one ruling on their behalf. So that's another this kind of idea. Maybe we should talk about as journalists. This is maybe a journalism question. How do we deal with this question of, is it different when you go into sacred space versus another kind of private or public space?
Well, I think we're dealing with First Amendment issues, right? Yeah. I mean, Ken was listing all the different protections that we're talking about here, but freedom of religion is certainly one of them, and that disruptive nature. You cannot walk into a sacred space without disrupting someone's right and freedom to worship, and that to me is the crux of the ICE lawsuit. So.
Well, it's interesting, Bob, and you shared this early in our past conversations. So the whole prosecution with FACE, because what they're going after, what the reporters did, I think is legally defensible, and the First Amendment protects them. I believe that. But it's not unusual for reporters to get arrested. Mm-hmm. And under similar circumstances, it's almost always trespass.
Yes.
Which is a misdemeanor. They make bail and the prosecutor throws the case out because they have no interest in prosecuting over and over and over again. They're going after them with this FACE Act and a KKK Act, really, that prosecutes people for an attempt to deprive others of civil rights. That requires intent. Mm-hmm. And you could not prove intent by Don Lemon. I mean, his intent was to get the most views possible, but he wasn't going in there to say let's screw over the parishioners here. It wasn't an attempt to keep them from engaging in their. That was a byproduct, actually. So this is lunacy. It's a measure of what this administration is about in terms of its antipathy toward a free press. I mean, they're just throwing the book at them. It's going to cost Don Lemon a lot of money to defend himself. And it's not justified. If you want to charge him, do it, but charge him the way you've charged everybody else since the beginning of time.
What is fascinating, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I just want to clarify for those in the audience who may not, we referenced FACE, and some people may not know what that is, and it stands for Freedom of Access to Clinic Entrances, and it was an act that was signed in by, I believe, President Clinton, 1994, right, to prevent protesters from entering abortion clinics and impeding a woman's right to reproductive health services. And so they used that, or he signed that into law to prevent that. And now they're using that to prevent people from entering houses of worship. That's what they're suing, or that's what they're prosecuting Dunlemmon for, correct?
And they were able to do that though because Clinton couldn't get the bill passed without
the KKK.
offering a paragraph that included churches. That was a demand by Republicans. So it was there are a lot of people who believe that second clause is actually unconstitutional, but it hasn't been tested because it hasn't been prosecuted.
And then there's the kind of context that the Trump administration is no longer in enforcing the FACE Act for clinics. So,
Right.
we have we're going to go to questions in just a sec. One other interesting thing in this thing, as to get to Ken's point, I have been trying to get the St. Paul Police Department to tell me if they're ever going to charge anyone, because so what happened is the police showed up. By the time the police showed up, they were out of the building, and so they didn't arrest anyone. They're investigating it. So so this could be a case where they left and they were we're not going to arrest you because you're already gone, but if you come back, or they could arrest them, and like Ken said, there's a trespassing. There's like three things going on there. There's like several things, right? Is this how do you cover this in a sacred space? Was it covered journalistic? Maybe two things. Was this illegal? If this law is broken, what law is broken? Which looks like trespassing, which is, as Ken said, this is always the way it's. If someone's arrested and charged with trespassing, and then the questions of whether this was covered in the most professional and ethical way, which is, I think, probably some of the question we're talking about here.
Yeah.
So there are two really good questions in here. The first one is this from the audience: how does the broadening of journalism, the idea of citizen journalism and live streaming, independent journalism, or people who have their own Substack, come to play here? How are they protected under the free press laws?
Well, they're absolutely protected. The definition of a journalist is not whether they make the big money we all made. It's someone who gathers news and information for public dissemination. That's it. And shield laws should apply to them. Everything should apply to them. And in this case, it's not even a close call because the two reporters are in fact longtime professional reporters.
Yes.
And they just happen to be, in one sense, they're between jobs, but there's no question that they are journalists, and what they're doing is to be protected as freedom of the press. So I do think that at this point, I think Don Lemon made that as we see major corporations buckling the pressure from the government, you've got people going in there and covering stories without corporate interference.
Yeah.
And so what's described as the broadening of American journalism in this case is a very good thing. New techniques, new approaches, and although some of it may make us uncomfortable, they're absolutely invaluable watchdogs on what's going on.
Yeah, it's an interesting perspective. It's very 2026 because usually freelancers, Substackers, citizen journalists don't have corporate backing.
Yes,
right.
Yes.
That was what we all wanted, right? That badge that says we are a member of a credible news organization, and that's an interesting perspective. That but now we don't have the interference of said corporation, so
yes,
it's actually an advantage.
So here's a second one. This is a good question. If ACT UP tells you they're planning to desecrate the Eucharist at St. Patrick's Cathedral, what would you do?
I'm sorry, what was the first part of that question?
So if you find out ACT UP, which was just so they're going to come, someone's going to come and disrupt the Eucharist and during the service, what do you do if you get that tip?
I think it goes back to that original question of what is the history of the group that's doing this? What is their do they have a history of violence? What does disrupting the Eucharist mean, right?
Yeah.
But I think that you go to St. Patrick's Cathedral and you take a seat in the pew and and wait.
Yeah, I'm with you. You go up and show. If you find out something's going to happen, you go and you find out.
Wait, what if this is escalated and somebody says, I'm going to go and punch the pastor?
Yeah, then I might, that's a good question. I might call them and say, look, because that's a act of violence. I don't want to be
Right.
if you're telling me, like, it's not quite the confession, but confessional, sometimes I'm going to go kill someone or set fire to something.
Hmm.
I'm, and this is probably in my mind too. Now, this protest isn't like that, but I am, we are, this story's been stuck in my head. So, just the protection of houses of worship. So everyone know what Andy Ogles is, and this is a little bit off topic, but stuck with me as well. Andy Ogles is like Muslims have no place in America, right? So the first mosque I covered in Tennessee was a mosque that was burned down and it had white power things all over it, right? There was this rhetoric, but also folks taking action. So I have this kind of maybe gut thing, even though I trespassed in the one church, like the safety of that place or minority groups was in our mind too. You would hate to be the one someone who knew about that, didn't do anything.
Yeah.
It's also that houses of worship have been, we've had a lot of attacks on them. We've had a lot of shootings at them. So it's a little, it goes back to that Minnesota place. If you think, oh, wait, this is a place where people have been shot before, right? And they're going to jump up in the middle of the thing and they've got recording equipment that could, if you look at a shotgun mic with a holder, looks like a gun. You're like, it's complicated.
It is, and
complicated.
I was said you want to look into the history of the protest group, right? But you also want to be aware of the history of the religious group, right? Be it a Muslim community that's been targeted, be it a Jewish community that's been targeted. If you know a group is going to be going to a synagogue right after someone just drove a truck through a synagogue, you might want to factor that in. Are you gonna let them know that maybe they want additional security that night, or that's certainly something to consider. But you also raised another point, a good point, that it's not exclusive to those communities, right?
Yeah. No,
it can happen anywhere.
This may be a little too much in-house in terms of newsroom thinking, but I think if somebody gratuitously told me they were going to do something that was a crime, first of all, I wouldn't have afforded them a confidentiality ahead of time without knowing what it was. So I would say just a tip, friend. If you're going to commit a crime, don't tell a reporter.
Right.
If I don't write about this tomorrow, when they arrest you, I will be called in.
Yes.
From this conversation. So don't do what you're planning on doing, and don't involve me. I mean, that's what's kind of uncomfortable. All this, people who tip off reporters that are about to do something illegal, it's like they know they won't be reported on, but and that's what makes it feel complicit. But it's the nature of the beast.
Yeah. Right. So there are some. We have some other questions. One is just, if I'm recording at an event and someone at the church tells me to stop, and I'm a reporter, do I need to stop?
I say plead your case.
But who's? I guess the question is who is someone?
Yeah,
right.
The person sitting next to you, or somebody who represents the church.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's going to be a sequence that goes like this: you stop recording, you say no. Now I'll ask you to leave, and now you have to go. It's not.
Right.
Yeah. The second, go ahead.
I was going to say, I have a question for you, Bob. Just going back to that story you shared at the beginning, you say you regret staying there and watching the screens until the police got there. But did you get answers that you wouldn't have gotten otherwise?
No, because
or was it not worth it? It
wasn't worth it. And actually, there was nothing. I ended up deciding, okay, what I'll do is I will just call this was a fight between a bunch of older congregants and the pastor. And I knew all the older congregants were there. So I just called them right after, said, hey, can we just chat about what happened? And then they told me all the things that happened, and I got the information. And that church actually let me come back a number of times, and they were pretty gracious. They did set up rules like, no, if you can't come to our meeting, you can't broadcast on the facility. So they ended up setting more rules, which I did follow and other people didn't. So I felt maybe self-righteous about that. But they also did have, this was a funny thing. They did have, I didn't quite, this is related. It goes back to my inside outside question. They were protested by Westboro Baptist. And Westboro Baptist would post on their website and send out a press release, we're going to go to this church and protest. So I was like, oh, I'm going to go to that. But I called Westboro Baptist, and I also called the church and said they publicly announced, what is your response that they're going to come out to do here? Their response was to bring them donuts and coffee. So I didn't feel like that was a betrayal of information because they publicly posted it. So I'm like, oh, you should probably know. So but the outside part matters here too. Like if this had been a protest on the sidewalk in front of the church, then in terms of the protesters being charged with trespassing, it's different.
Yeah.
I mean, there's the Westboro Baptist has a famous case protecting their right to protest at a funeral for a soldier, right? They have that kind of protest, but inside the building is a little bit trickier. Oh, this is Ari has a good question. What advice do we have for churches for dealing with reporters?
I'm sorry, what advice do we have for churches?
Churches or houses of worship on how to deal with reporters.
Pray for us.
Pray for us. Yes. Yes.
Please pray for us. I mean, my advice is always, I would be a horrible PR person, because my advice is always talk to journalists. They want to tell your story, and the more transparency, the better. What are you trying to hide, right? Yeah. Because when you don't talk to the press, when you don't welcome them inside, then that's just going to pique their curiosity even more. Yeah. So it's just transparency is always the way to go.
Yeah, and building rapport is everything. Yep. Even reporters with attitude find it hard to be too aggressive with people who are open and positive. Yep. If you do have something to hide, don't talk to reporters. That's also good advice. But
I actually had somebody ask me this, who's a minister friend had asked me, and I just recently, they were having a big event and they were worried about this, and I was like, well, okay, here's advice. You could have someone that the person could talk to, so have a contact person when they want to get help, make it easier for them to talk to you, when you're there. That was the main thing, right? And then you get to decide whether you want them to come. If you want to say you want no press, then you can tell them there's no press. But better to talk to them, but also better to be proactive and say, like, okay, if you got questions. So I was just, again, reporting at some churches this week over a controversial subject. So I called the head, but a couple of them were like, we're going to have, we'll have someone meet you so that if the congregation has questions, why are these reporters here covering things? If you need to talk to someone, you can talk to congregants, but you can also, if you need to talk to an official leader, I can be the liaison. If you need other things, they can be like a liaison helps, right? So that you can actually get what you need. So then everyone, then that can make it better. But it's like, the relationship there.
I've never enjoyed having a minder, someone who walks you through and watches your every move, and every person you talk to. But if the option is not getting in at all, that's...
No, and I've had minders. I had Dave Ramsey sent me a minder when I went to his place to cover worship. But
sometimes it can work to your advantage.
But not a mind. I was thinking more of a liaison. There's a difference between a liaison and like a person who's like, okay, I'm your person if you need anything. Yeah. But not that they're sitting next to you watching you.
Right.
That's the people we end up talking with. They stopped by once and said, you got everything you need. We had a question about a ceremony at the church. Okay, they can explain it to us. But not a minder saying you can't do things, but more liaison to help person get the answers that they need.
You know, people in the position of having to speak on behalf of a religious institution or
Oh,
an institution for that matter will not believe this, but the very best defense is actually proactive. When you get the call,
yeah.
say, I am so excited to talk to you. How
Yes.
soon can you be here? What can I get you for lunch?
Yeah.
As we all know,
Oh,
we smell
Especially
fear.
lunch.
Yeah,
That's
lunch.
we,
Yes.
but we all smell fear. And if you get the
Yeah.
opposite, confidence, willingness to share, we're just disarmed as can be. You know,
Yeah.
it's like these people have nothing to hide. And
Yeah.
there's, you know, it's just being forthright is so refreshing, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there are a couple of questions. We have like 2 minutes. So one question is, have you been in a situation where someone in the congregation has tried to stop you from being there or from reporting? And what would you do?
I have. I mean, going back to my days of covering Willow Creek, when their pastor, Bill Hybels, had been accused of mistreating women, sexual misconduct, and the Chicago Tribune, we did an investigation and did this story, and I wanted to see how they were addressing it with their congregation, right? So I was making regular stops at Willow Creek, and because I wanted to see that they did not believe the story. They thought it was completely made up. And so when I was at the church, they would, once they saw me and recognized me, they had told me I was not welcome there. Had an official asked me to leave, I would have done due diligence, pleaded my case, and then left in the end if they had did not acquiesce to my pleas.
Yeah.
But that it never came to that.
Yeah.
Congregants asked me to leave, but no one official ever did. So
I actually I was covering an anti-Muslim event at a big church where I had a relationship where I'd known the pastor a number of times and talked to him, but I had people at the event threaten me. And I was like, I gave them the so what kind of thing, right? They had them threaten me from the stage too. I was like, fine. But the pastor was an ex-con, and he, then I was interviewing him afterwards. I'm saying like, if I got a problem, can I come talk to you? He's like, yeah, just come talk to me. So he's like, I will take care of those. Like having a relationship with leaders was also like, oh, okay. They wanted to make sure I had access, which was interesting. So I knew who to call and say, hey, someone's really upset about this. Is this an official thing, or is this someone just being angry? And he was angry that the people had treated a reporter that way, which is interesting. So
yeah.
Well, we are close to the end. I'm supposed to remind folks of stuff. There's going to be a webinar recording available on our YouTube page. And if you go to rna.org, you can get more information about us. And we thank you for being here today. Thank you for our panelists, Ken and Manya. It was great to do this. Such an interesting topic. I could talk about it all day. And it's actually good to kind of like hash through this thing because it's a complicated and interesting topic.
Yes, it is.
Great.
Thank you to everybody who
Thanks, everyone who
logged
came.
on today to watch.
Yeah.